This is Morgan Freeman with an American History Special, the Newsboys Strike. It was an event mostly forgotten in American history. At a time in the U.S. where titans of industry have their way with the masses, an enterprising group of small but determined citizens forced two of the most powerful men in the world to concede. In July of 1899, newspaper owners Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst faced a distribution crisis that saw their circulation fall by over 60%. The crisis began when the two men and the newspapers they owned pursued a path of exploitation against what they saw as a powerless workforce at the time: children. Having a newspaper route after school is a memory shared by many youth in the 20th century. Many families, in fact, relied on the extra income their children earned from this. It was hard work, often requiring young men to stay out until late into the evening. Newspapers were selling their editions for 1 penny apiece. Sometimes there were early, afternoon, and late editions on the same day. There was no other form of mass media at the time. Radio was in its infancy as a technology, and broadcast television was still half a century away. If you wanted the news, weather forecast, stock market closing, or sports scores, newspapers were your only source. This provided opportunities for poor and immigrant children to make extra money for their families. In the late 1800s, it came with a risk too, however. Newspapers sold these editions to distributors in bundles of 100 for 50 cents. Selling every paper in the bundle meant you would double your investment, an attractive profit for struggling families. Newsboys, as they came to be known, popped up across the country to help sell newspapers. They were mostly young boys working during or after school and late into the evening, trying to help their families survive. Gathering at city stops to wait for delivery trucks to bring bundles for them to buy, they would then spread out and peddle the newspapers to neighborhoods across the city. Being left with unsold newspapers, however, would cut into these profits. And days when less than half were sold meant losses for the newsboys. Because newspapers were the only way to get the news, however, the risk was well worth the reward in most cases. In August of 1898, the Spanish-American War erupted. People eager for updates on the situation turned to newspapers more than ever. Circulation increased dramatically for newspapers, and seeing an opportunity, they increased the price of a bundle from 50 to 60 cents for distributors. The increase was absorbed by the newsboys easily at the time because circulation increased heavily during the war. When the war ended and circulations returned to normal, most newspapers reduced the price of a bundle of newspapers back down to 50 cents. Two of the most powerful papers, however, the Evening World and New York Evening Journal, decided to keep the price increase in place. The 20% increase, coupled with the end of the war and a large decline in circulation, made it much more difficult for the newsboys. They would have to spend even more time hawking newspapers to get by. Newsboys could even be seen trying to sell papers late into the evening just to break even sometimes. Despite pleas and threats from distributors urging these newspapers to reduce the price back to pre-war levels, they held firm, felt their dominance, and quick media would force distributors to capitulate and conform. They greatly underestimated the newsboys. July 18, 1899. A group of newsboys in Long Island waited their usual spot for the newspaper car to deliver bundles for them to sell. The delivery driver approaches as normal, stops the cart, and gets out to begin his normal delivery. This group of newsboys, however, has other ideas. They chide the driver and then tip his cart over. They tear up and burn all the bundles and declare a rebellion against the newspapers owned by Pulitzer and Hearst. The following day, children from Manhattan and Brooklyn joined the movement. The Newsboy strike had begun. The initial actions taken by the protesters were unorganized, and many resorted to violence to resolve the dispute. Gangs of protesters brutally beat any boy crossing the line and seen selling newspapers on the street. Their newspaper bundles were burned and torn to shreds. Grown men soon replaced the boys who dared to cross the line, but they fared no better as gangs of young men raged against them as well. Police were paid to protect the newspaper vendors, but even they could not control the violence. One group of boys could easily distract the officers, while another group dealt with the scab. The newspapers resorted to recruiting women to sell the newspapers for them. They faced slightly less brutality. Most young boys were not willing to assault a woman at the time, a social taboo that benefited Hearst and Pulitzer. The public did not like the violence, and despite the increased cost the newspapers incurred, they were happy to have the people largely on their side at buying their newspapers. About a week later, on the 24th, a rally was held at Irving Hall in Manhattan. Approximately 8,000 young men showed up at the rally, including nearly 5,000 from Manhattan, where Hearst and Pulitzer saw a large portion of their paper's distribution numbers. Another 2,000 came from Brooklyn, and nearly 1,000 others arrived from other boroughs in the city. State Senator Timothy D. Sullivan sponsored the rally, which began with local business leaders and politicians stating their support for the cause. Union leader David Simmons then took the stage and publicly stated the Newsboys' demands, which included a reduction back to the pre-war bundle price of 50 cents. Simmons was 21 at the time and had been hawking newspapers since he was 8 years old. His leadership was underscored by his fighting spirit. Simmons was an amateur prize fighter as well, but despite his reputation, he called for non-violent means of resolving the situation. He swore, however, to keep the strike in place until the Newsboys' demands were met. The rally included many more powerful speeches by others who inspired the strike, including Annie Kelly, one of the few newswomen who supported the strike. Brooklyn Union leader Racetrack Higgins spoke, as did Union leader Kid Blink, who gave the speech of the night. Louis Kid Blink Belletti was 18 at the time of the strike. He was an undersized redhead with a patch over one eye and a firebrand charisma that served as a sharp contrast to David Simmons. His speech hit directly at Hearst and other members of the public at the time. Friends and fellow workers,
this is a time which tries the hearts of men. This is the time when we've got to stick together like glue. We knows what we want, and we get it even if we's blind.
The rally changed public perception of the strike. People were now behind the Newsboys, and many avoided buying either the Evening World or the New York Evening Journal in support of them. A parade was scheduled for the 26th, where an estimated 6,000 newsboys would be accompanied by music and fireworks to increase awareness among the public. A permit was required for the parade, however, but was never obtained by Union leaders David Simmons and Kid Blink. This failure enraged the Union faithful, who started asking questions about their leaders and their loyalty to the cause. Some members noted that Kid Blink was wearing nicer clothes now, and rumors swirled around that he and David Simmons had taken a bribe from the newspapers to sabotage the movement. It was also suggested that the two were secretly working with the two newspapers to sell the boycotted editions behind the backs of the union members. Both David Simmons and Kid Blink denied these charges, but were nonetheless forced to resign and take a smaller role in the union. Others tried to step up and lead in their place, but none inspired the members like Kid Blink or had the instincts and charisma of David Simmons. The cohesion the membership once had for the cause withered with the parade cancellation and the immunization of Kid Blink and David Simmons. On the night of the 26th, Kid Blink was chased through the streets by an angry mob of newsboys looking for retribution for the apparent betrayal of their once inspirational leader. Kid found the police officer and ran behind him for protection. The officer instead, however, arrested Kid Blink for disorderly conduct. Kid was charged, fined, and processed at the police station, all within earshot of the newsboys outside loudly taunting him. Whatever momentum the strike once had was now dissolved. Although the Newsboys Union was in disarray, the boycott of the Evening World and the New York Evening Journal continued as citizens continued to support the cause of the Newsboys. Hearst and Pulitzer continued to suffer losses, and finally on August 1st, the two newspapers came to a resolution with the Newsboys. The price of bundles would be kept at 60 cents. But the newspapers would now agree to buy back any unsold newspapers from distributors. This compromise allowed newsboys to avoid working late into the night, having to sell all of their copies. The next day, on August 2nd, the newsboys agreed to the terms of the deal, ended the strike, and dissolved the union. There were a few localized newsboys strikes that preceded this one, but none that matched the scale and impact of the 1899 strike. Several decades later, legislation surrounding child labor laws further relieved the pressure put on newsboys. The strike in 1899 was said to have influenced other newsboy strikes in the early part of the 20th century. The Newsboys strike of 1899 later inspired DC Comics to create the Newsboys Legion comic in 1942. In 1992, Disney premiered a Broadway musical called Newsies that fictionalized the accounts of the strike, and in 2003, a non-fiction account of the story called Kids on Strike by Susan Campbell Bartoletti was released. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. You can also click the notifications bell to be alerted every time a new video is released. Thanks again for watching.